Hey guys, I apologize for having this lecture, not have any video with it today, but I was having some issues with my little camera here. So I am going to just record it this way so that you get your content on time. Having said that, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So lecture one today is on kind of an introduction to biology and also some information about the scientific method. Actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna type. Maybe. Yes, okay. So I'll start with a super basic term, biology. Okay, so this is the scientific study of life. And yes, the fact that it's scientific put in there does have a purpose. As you can imagine, there's a variety of ways in which one could study life: artistically, religiously, philosophically, psychology, sociology. There's lots of different ways. So biology specifically is the scientific study of life. One of the things that biology uses a lot, frankly, all sciences use a lot, is something called the scientific method, which I'm sure you've heard of. The scientific method really is nothing more than a variety of steps, a series of steps to help identify a question and propose an answer. Okay, I'm going to give you what those steps are in order, and then we'll talk about it here for a second. So the first step of the scientific method is observation. Actually, I'm just going to list these real quick, and then we'll talk. Okay. All right, so let's look at this. First off, the scientific method is you have an observation. You see something. Okay, that's the first thing. Then the second thing is you have a question about what you see. Okay, why do so many, well, let's start observation. A lot of redheads have freckles. Question, why do so many redheads have freckles? Your hypothesis is a possible answer to the question based off of an observation, or the observation, I should say. This here. So in other words, when it's based on the observation, I observed that a lot of redheads have freckles. Why is that? The hypothesis, maybe because red hair and freckles go together. Okay, so that hypothesis ties back into what you observed. You wouldn't say maybe redheads have freckles because I like to drink chocolate milkshakes. That's a totally random example, but it kind of illustrates the point rather dramatically. You liking chocolate milkshakes has nothing to do with the observation that redheads seem to have freckles. Okay. So after your hypothesis is something called a prediction. Prediction is an if-then type statement. So your hypothesis, redheads or red hair and freckles go together. They're linked somehow. So your prediction is if red hair and freckles are genetically linked, then there should be evidence for it in the DNA. Okay, your experiment would be to look at the DNA sequences of redheads for both hair color and freckles, or you could simply look it up. There you go, with a scientific source. At that point, you will analyze the information you've gathered and decide if your hypothesis still holds true. So if you read a bunch of data that shows that actually there does seem to be gene linkage between red hair and freckles, you can say your hypothesis so far is correct, that they do appear to be genetically linked. Okay. If that comes back where there's no significant genetic linkage between red hair and freckles, you go back to your hypothesis and develop a new one. Okay. So now that we've done this, let me just point out to you that the scientific method is something that you use every single day of your life. We all do. It's just we don't tend to walk around saying to ourselves, I'm using the scientific method. I just made an observation. If you do, people probably look at you strangely, but it's happening in your head, even if you're not identifying it to yourself. For example, how many of you have gone to plug in your phone at night and realized to your horror that it's not charging? The little lightning bolt thing doesn't come on the battery to show that it's charging. This is a crisis. Your observation is, my phone isn't charging. Your natural question that follows is, why? Why isn't it charging? Oh my gosh, why isn't it charging? Your hypothesis, maybe it's, my hypothesis is it's not plugged into the outlet. Okay, well, my prediction, if I plug it into the outlet, then it will charge. Your experiment is to look to see if it's not plugged into the outlet. If that's the case, you go ahead and plug it in. Your analysis is to look back at the phone, the little battery icon, to see if it's charging. If you find that it is not charging, you go right back to your hypothesis. Okay, well, it has nothing to do with being plugged in because it's plugged in and everything's like fine that way. Your next question is, or your next hypothesis needs to be, something like, maybe this cord doesn't work. If I get a new cord, then it will charge. I go get a new cord, I plug it into my phone, and I analyze. I see if the little lightning bolt is on the battery. Okay. The result is it's charging. Hallelujah. Again, these are the types of things that go through your head, but you're not saying to yourself, I'm developing a hypothesis. But these are the natural steps that our brains take in order to solve a problem. Okay. So there's nothing really new or daunting about the scientific method. It's just that science loves labels. And so rather than just allowing the brain to go through those processes without identifying each step of them, they have been given names. The steps have been given names in the scientific method. But if you realize this is something that you do continuously in your everyday life, it becomes not a big deal. I bet if you sit here for 3 seconds, you can come up with 3 different ways that you've used the scientific method today. Okay, whether it was, I don't know, everything from deciding what to wear, to trying to figure out why the engine light came on in your car, to trying to decide if that milk in the fridge is still good. Okay, normal problem solving steps our brain takes. Okay, so our hypothesis, again, possible answer to the question, the longer that a hypothesis goes without being proved wrong, the stronger that hypothesis becomes. Okay, so if you can't prove it wrong after lots of experiments, if other scientists can't prove it wrong after lots of experiments, that hypothesis becomes stronger and stronger and more widely accepted as a really strong possibility for how something happened or for why something happens. So the theory of evolution, the Big Bang theory, these are theories because no one was there to see it happen. Or I'm sorry, those started off as, I jumped ahead of myself. They started out as hypotheses, but after constantly being tested without being able to be proven wrong, they became the next step up, which is a theory. And a theory remains a theory only because you can't prove it through math and no one was there to actually see it happen. But repeated experiments, or in the case of evolution, fossil evidence, would seem to support that. Okay, so I put theory down here. Oops. So theory. Okay. A comprehensive and well-supported explanation. And again, this comes from repeated experimentation. Goodness. Okay. And again, you can't prove a theory. So what you do is you try to disprove it. You know, it seems counterintuitive, but that's what you do in science. You attempt to disprove something. So when other scientists come in to test a hypothesis, they're trying to see if they can prove it false. Kind of like a game of that board game Clue. It's like a process of elimination. If everything else proves not to be true, then the one thing that's left must be. It's kind of like that. Although with theories, there are multiple explanations that could still perhaps address the evidence and be used, but the one that has the most evidence is usually the one that's the most supported. Okay. After a theory comes a law. Scientific law, not a social law, or like a judicial law. Theories can often be, laws can often be proved through math. And that's generally what makes the difference between something that stays a theory and something that's a law. You can prove it through math, and then it's fixed and it's a law. Laws usually describe specific phenomena. Okay. So a law then is going to be stronger than a theory. If we're looking at strength, so to speak, hypothesis is going to be the weakest, followed by theory, then a law, and then finally a fact. And a fact is information considered to be completely true, at least based on current evidence. Okay, so notice that, based on current evidence, that's because at one point in time, as we all know, the fact was that the Earth was the center of the universe. There are many such facts that over the centuries have been proven to be false. So it may be a fact now, and it's a fact that gets used and presumed to be true as experimentation, what have you, moves forward, but it can be proven to be untrue. Now, that was a big thing in physics when it came to relativity. The fact, the way that physicists went about looking at the universe was flawed. And so when Einstein was able to present his theories on relativity, it corrected that. So that the fact that people had been operating off of was proven to be false, at least in certain situations. Okay, let's move on to talk some about experimental design. You can't talk about scientific method without talking about experimentation. Okay, so I'm going to give you some vocabulary here. Okay, a variable is something that's going to change in an experiment. Okay. Actually, I'm not going to give all of the rest. Okay, so a factor that's changed in an experiment. I was testing medication. If I wanted to see if medication A was better than medication B, the medications in the experiment would be the variables, because those are the things that would be changing. I'd be looking to see the effects that changing those medications has. Okay. In addition to variables, you're going to have something called actually I'll do experimental group first. An experimental group is the group that's going to receive, the variable, the factor that's being changed. And then you have your control group, sometimes called the test group, sometimes called the placebo group. The control group does not receive the variable. It isn't exposed to the thing being changed. So, oops. Hang on a sec. I'm going to be able to write up here for a minute. Okay. So when it comes to our variable, again, let's say that we're doing an experiment for medication. Let's say we're doing an experiment for blood pressure medication. In this case, it's not really an experiment. That would be a study, and you'd have, you'd be going through the steps for FDA approval. But let's say that our variable in this situation is blood pressure medication. And we're going to have two medications. We're going to have medication A and medication B. A is the new medication, and B is the existing medication. It's been on the market for a long time, proven success. Okay. So now we want to know, we hypothesize that medication A is actually going to outperform B. It's going to be better. It's going to have fewer side effects. It's going to work faster. So now we need to test that. So what we do is come down here to our experimental group. And since they're the ones that are exposed to the variable, they're going to get medication A. We're going to give them the new stuff. Our control group, which does not get exposed to the variable, they're going to get the existing medication. They're going to get B. And if you're wondering why they get an actual prescription medication at all, rather than just a placebo, it's because you can't not treat somebody in medical studies. You can't not treat someone who has a health condition in order to test the efficiency of a new drug. So if you're testing blood pressure medication, that means you're using this drug on people who have issues with controlling their blood pressure. So you're going to have your test group, which is going to receive the new medication, and you're going to have the control group, which is going to receive the medication that they've already been on. Okay, and then you're going to compare the results between the two groups. I was going to say something else about that, but now I can't remember what it is. So that's how you set this up as far as your variable, your experimental group, your control group. But let's think about some of the factors in this situation that would need to be kept the same in order to truly get a measure of how efficient A is when compared to B. What I mean by that is, let's start with saying that everybody in both the experimental and control groups need to be in the same age range. Well, that's what I was going to tell you. The people in these groups, they have no idea what they're assigned to. They know they're partaking in a clinical trial, their medications are being tested, but they don't know if they've been given the new meds or the old meds. Okay. Anyway, but you want to make sure that you get a group of individuals that all are kind of in the same age range. You don't want to do the 20 to 75, right? You're probably looking more at like, let's do 40 to 65. You want to look at their pre-existing health conditions. There's many different things that cause high blood pressure. You probably want to make sure that you're treating individuals that have the same underlying condition that's causing it. In other words, you shouldn't be mixing up somebody that has hypertension because of blocked artery with people that have hypertension because of kidney issues. Two different underlying problems, and that would more than likely very much affect the outcome between A and B. Age range, pre-existing health conditions. You might, for some of these, want to go with sex. And for this class, I will tell you that when I use the word sex, I'm not talking about reproduction. I'm talking about the XX or XY chromosome combinations, or XXX or XXXY, okay? So this isn't, I'm not using it like social scientists use it. I'm using it strictly in the biological sense, meaning what is the chromosomal makeup? Is it XX female, XY male? Okay, so just to clarify how that term is used in this class for science. Anyway, so you might want to narrow this down between all men or all women. Okay, you might not want to mix these two groups up when you're designing your experiment. There's a variety of other things you'd want to keep common. For instance, you'd want to keep the dose the same. You'd want to keep the length of treatment the same. You don't want somebody, one group on it for a month and the other group on it for a week. You'd want to keep like the time of day when they're going to take it consistent. Do they get up and take it with a meal in the morning? Do they go to bed and take it right before they go to sleep? You want to keep stuff like that completely consistent. Anything that could potentially cause a false result. So we could actually go on and on with this list. I'm not going to, because I think you get the point. If you don't, reach out to me, please, or watch this again, because I will more than likely be including a question or two, either on quizzes or midterm or both, about how to set up an experiment. Okay, the last part of chapter 1. The last part of chapter 1 goes over properties of life, which I definitely ask questions, a lot of questions about on both quizzes and midterms. Okay, so I'm not putting these in any particular order. This is just the order I'm listing them in. But speaking of order, the first one is order. In order for something to be considered truly alive, they have usually levels of organization. So whether it's a single-celled organism like bacteria or a multicellular organism like humans, we do have different levels of organization that ensure that functions happen in a routine, structured way. Okay. Second thing, cells. Cells are the smallest unit of life. Okay. Beyond the cellular level, on this, going even smaller, then you're down onto the atomic level, where you're talking about atoms and protons and neutrons and things like that. But the cell itself is the smallest unit that is considered alive. Living things need to have at least one of them. Okay, next, living things show growth and development. So I like to think of these as being changes during a life cycle or stages of life. Obviously, humans go from being tiny little babies to, I guess, what all of us are now, which is not tiny little babies anymore. And even bacteria will have growth and development on a genetic level, and then also just as an organism, that cell that it is can die. Okay, next, energy processing. If it's alive, it can process energy. It can take a substance and turn it into something else, which it uses to fuel its life functions. Okay, so there's some things that do that through chemical means, taking chemicals from the soil or from decomposing organic material. There's things like obviously plants that do photosynthesis, which uses a bunch of inorganic substances to create organic fuel and energy. And then obviously things like humans, which consume all kinds of other, primary producers, consumers, for us to have our energy. So in order for something to be alive, it has to transform some substance into energy. Okay. All right. 5, regulation. It has to have control of the body or the cells. Okay. So in other words, it's not just out there existing. It has some regulatory processes that kind of govern how it lives and what it consumes. Okay. Then we have reproduction. This is going to be, reproduction is creating more of itself, which I always felt like is kind of redundant to have to say that, but it has to create more of itself. It creates more of the same species, more of the same organism. Okay, living things also have a response to the environment, meaning it responds to stimuli in its surroundings. Okay, so plants, for instance, will move in response to sunlight. You can actually see some plants and trees over time where their stems or trees, their trunks will lean or curve in a direction that allows its leaves to access the most sunlight. And then, of course, things like humans, we respond to the environment in simple and complex ways. Simple is, ouch, that's hot, let me move my hand. And complex is the chemical response, hormonal response to all of the things happening in our body all the time. Finally, we get to evolution. This is a core unifying theme throughout biology. Now, I'm not going to talk about evolution this second, but I am going to talk about it in a minute. So hang tight for me. Because while we're talking about unifying themes, we're going to go over some of the major things we see. There's only 5 of these. Okay. First, the relationship that exists between structure and function. So let me take this to a non-organic level. I want you to think about whatever you're sitting on right this second. How does its structure, the way that it's built, affect its function, what you're using it for? I'm sitting in an old creaky desk chair. Its structure has a seat and a back and armrests. And it swivels so I can turn easily. I know you're jealous, right? What are you sitting on? Again, how about what are you using to listen to this lecture? I bet its structure fits its function. Same with anything you use to write something down. Everything around us that we create, even some of the things that we don't create, like things in our own bodies, have a structure that matches its function. So inside of our bodies, our heart is structured in such a way that it can pump blood throughout the entire body. Lungs are created in such a way that they're able to oxygenate the blood. you know, I'm not going to continue to list all of the things, but enzymes are structured to break down the foods that we eat. Structure and function, it's a big deal. Okay, we have the flow of information. This is, I often think about this as far as in our body systems, we have a nervous system that allows information to travel from our peripheral nervous system, like what we have in our fingers and extremities, to our central nervous system and brain for processing. So back to that response to environment, if you touch something that's hot, that sensory information travels from your fingers, your fingertips, all the way up to your brain in less time than it takes to even blink. And that information is processed and can be acted upon. Okay, then we have pathways that transform energy. I've already talked about this because this one is a lot like energy processing for properties of life. Again, there's some way that the organism can take matter and turn it into energy, or take energy and use it to do work. Okay, interaction within biological systems. So for humans, I just talked about heart pumping, lungs oxygenating the blood. That's an example of how those biological, at least within us, our own bodies, how those biological systems interact. You require both to keep an organism alive. And then that can also be applied to a greater biological system, like an ecosystem. The interaction between the plants, animals, resources, energy, everything within that ecosystem that keeps it healthy. All right, now we're back to evolution. Okie dokie. Have you guys seen, because now I'm going to talk to you really briefly about what evolution is not. Because I know that we often come in with misconceptions. Have you guys seen that? I can't draw, but have you seen that like poster? Has like the ape. That's an ape. You guys like it? Like my stick figure ape? I know, I was pretty impressed with it too. That slowly develops, becomes taller, and eventually becomes less ape-like and more like a man. And then at the end, it is a man. Ta-da! Right? Yeah, so this is like way better than any actual picture poster you could see of this. I'm so impressed with my drawing skills right now. Anyway, I think you know what I'm talking about as far as the poster is concerned. The basic poster supposedly depicting human evolution, where you have an ape that eventually becomes an upright human being. This depiction is inaccurate for multiple reasons, and I'll get into some of those reasons at the very end of the semester when we go over evolution in a little bit more detail. But the first thing I want to tell you in regard to this is that evolution, its definition, you ready for this? Change in a population over time. That's what evolution is. That means that this takes in a wide range of change. Okay, so if you look back at the Ice Age and the different types of megafauna that existed, like, well, what you see in all the movies, Ice Age, right? The mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, the giant tree sloths, all of these things that we have beautiful, intact, frozen, samples of. The fact that they died out is an example of evolution, and that what it shows is change in that population over time. Okay, if you look at modern humans, and you look at the fact that humans are taller on average than we used to be and live longer, a lot of that has to do with access to health and food resources. But regardless of the cause, it has shown change in the population over time. We didn't sprout another head. We don't have another eye or a tail or wings or anything else. We've simply gotten kind of taller on average, and we live longer on average. So when we talk about evolution as the semester goes on, I want you to think about it from that approach. Okay? Change, not the idea that men came from apes. Again, incorrect, but we'll get to that at the end. Evolution is frequently misrepresented and misunderstood. And I just don't want the class to start off with that, since we already are talking about how it's a unifying theme. Again, try to like picture it as how population changes as time goes by. And that's it. We all know that things go extinct. We know that, populations that once had lighter fur and over time have darker fur. That's still evolution. Okay, so broaden that perspective on that a little bit. I do talk a little bit about evolution and religion towards the end of the semester when I hit those chapters, and explore all of that. I actually love talking about evolution and religion. So I'm kind of an outlier in some ways when it comes to that. But regardless, this is important to me that you think about this definition as we go through the semester. Okay, congratulations. This is the end of lecture 1 on the scientific method. Give yourself a round of applause and reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks, guys. Bye.